Hi, this is Roger. Thanks for dropping by. I'm going to have a go at repotting these two now. My big Masdevallia. I haven't got a clue what's in the pot. And this very large Coleogene. Again, I don't have a clue what's in the pot. Scissors are soaking in the rubbing alcohol, 70%. Not Jack Daniels. I like my orchids, but I'm not wasting that stuff on them. That's what I use. Yeah, and looking at that, I think I need to get some more, don't I? So that's a job to do. And I've only just realised that's the last of my hydrogen peroxide, and I may well use that on these two plants, so I need to get some more of that ordered too. I have a shed load of moss soaking for the Masdevallia. I don't know what I'm going to put the Coleogene in yet. I'm going to make that judgment based on what's in its current pot, potted up by Burnham's, and how the roots look, their size and everything else. I don't know what I'm going to pot that in yet. I do say a shed load of moss soaking. It's a shed load of moss minus that. That came out of the middle of my hand. If you do use these moss, this type of sphagnum moss, you will get some of that every now and again. They're razor sharp thorns. I think it's probably gorse, but whatever it is, you don't see it, you feel it. And I've just felt it. Luckily it went in the middle of my hand, not in the end of my finger where it usually goes. And it didn't make a hole, so we don't have to plug the hole, do we? And that's not going in there with the other stuff, because that's highly likely I shall get prickled again. So that's going in the bin. Okay, let's get some out of the pot then. I'll get that out of the way, because that's going to be second. This is going to be first. Now that looks like a big pot, but it's not. That's its shield pot, as I call it. That's its pot that helps keep the roots cool, and keeps the roots in the dark too. Whether that's absolutely necessary for Coleogenes, I don't know, but the cooling effect of being inside a damp clay pot is genuine, and that works well. Now if we just have a quick look at that plant, just have a look at the leaves. Now there are a couple of black tips. You can virtually guarantee if you get black tips on healthy green leaves on Masdevallias, it's had too much food at some point, and that is the result of high feed normally. If the rest of the leaf looks a little bit manky, you can't make that judgment call. But in this case, at some point or another, it's had too much food. They don't like a lot of food, they just don't need it. Right, good thing is, this plant looks like it's just going to lift off the top of the pot, which probably means it's got next to no roots. But I do see signs of new roots. I think that's just going to flop off the top. Yep, there's hardly any roots in there. Hardly any roots at all. So, we'll work with what we've got. Difficult when you think of what a lot of orchids are actually like, you know, when you come to repot them. Now, there's some good roots there, growing tips and things, so there are some reasonable roots, which is what I was hoping. A lot of the ones, as usual with Masdevallias, in the middle of the plant are just gone, but that doesn't mean to say new ones won't come out from here. Don't make the assumption like on Oncidiums, because they're older bulbs, new growths come up all over the place on Masdevallias, but that is not a good root system. It's amazing how you can get a plant that looks like that, that's got next to no roots. But in their natural environment, looking at pickies of these growing wild, okay, this is a hybrid, but do you know this would split up into 3 or 4 plants. No, we keep it as one big plant. Excuse me. I'm not going to take much more of this off, because I can see delicate little new roots. In fact, I'm not going to take any more off. The media that it's come out of didn't look bad. It's not completely broken down or anything like that. I mean, it was me that repotted this, so the bark that was in there was good stuff. and the moss is pretty good quality, so it's not essential to get every little bit out, but I don't want to break little delicate roots like that. They're important. So that's it. I'm not taking any more off. I will give the whole of the base of the plant in through here, yeah, and all round here and all underneath with the hydrogen peroxide to make sure there's nothing in there that there shouldn't be. The base of Masdevallias, because they need to stay moist, are prone to mould, actually growing on the sheaths around the older growths. I've had it happen to me on several occasions. But if you get that, just treat it with some fungicide, quite honestly, rather than upend the plant. That's what some people do. Ooh, I've got some mould, kill the plant. No, it's easily treated. But that's it, that's all that's coming off of there. And that's going to get a thorough wash under the tap, the whole plant, to get all the dust off the leaves while I've got it in my hand. Then, well, first job, hydrogen peroxide. It's a good point. It's easily forgotten and I forget myself. If you're going to spray a plant with hydrogen peroxide at 3%, if you spray a wet plant, you've just diluted your 3% with all the water that's on the plant. They mix, so it's not 3% anymore, it's weak. So it probably doesn't do its job properly. So get your hydrogen peroxide spray done before you wet your plant. And then any washing and mucking about that you want to do it after the hydrogen peroxide's done its job. So we'll put that to one side for cleaning up. And as I say, I'm surprised that had such a poor root system. It might even go back in the same pot. I haven't made my mind up yet. It might go in one of my wider ones, but then it's going to look a little bit lost. So let's get this one out next. I've got a horrible feeling that a lot of the roots on this are going to be severely attached to the pot. I just hope not. I watched them grow from these two big fat bulbs down the side of the pot and I thought, yep, you're going to stick. Although it does seem to want to come out. Right, now, without damaging any new growths, let's see if we can lift it out. Cool, blimey, that's in there. It didn't want to come out. Hang on. Oh. Well, I was going to say that's part of the reason. I was just saying I've got nice white roots down the bottom of the pot, but what I've actually got is polystyrene peanuts. That seems to be a Burnham trait. They love them. Oh, this really is hanging in there. I've had to struggle like this getting a plant out of a pot for a long time. And the last one was a cattleya. And it was in a clay pot. Ah, there we go. Oh boy, oh boy. Right, roots stuck to pot. Oh, you probably can't see from there. Hang on, just a moment. Yeah, roots stuck around the inside of the pot. So it was actually hanging on in places. Now those roots have just had their velamen torn. So they might not make it as a consequence. But they might heal over. But the good bit is, we got roots. Yeah, strange little roots on this. They're sort of slightly hairy. And that normally indicates on orchid roots, if you've got little hairy bits on your roots, it tends to say that this plant could probably be semi-terrestrial. You know, you get things like Paphiopedilums that are terrestrial in the main, and they've got hairy roots. And it's because they're nearer a normal plant than an orchid. You know, they grow in the ground and therefore their roots need to work that way, rather than epiphytic roots that don't work that way. Primary function of epiphytic roots is to hang on to something. Secondary function might be to provide some nutrients and some hydration. But primary function is to get a grip. Well, this is a good root system, I'm pleased. Thank you, Burnhams. Must have potted it up nicely for me. As I said, this was a request, basically. I contacted Sarah, and have you got so just seen one of your displays, and I quite like the look of the Coleogyne Moriana, the Brockhurst version, which was awarded. And she said, yeah, lots of people said that, and I haven't got any. So what do you mean you haven't got any? I've just seen it. Yeah, she said that's our display plants, that's our specimen plants. We don't sell those. And I did do the question rhetorical, of course. Well, not at any price. She said, well, everything's got a price. So, yeah, if you're willing to pay enough, she'd probably sell you one of her specimen plants. Now, the back end of this plant's coming off. You can see where it's been buried too deep and it's on a slope. So that one, no leaf, can come off. That raises the plant up when I repot it. But yeah, most of the bark will come off. Some of it's attached. What have we got? It's actually quite soft, this bark. You know, even the big bits. See, the bits near the top that don't stay wet for as long are quite hard. But the larger, chunkier bits that are down in the pot just fall apart. And I know when this was potted. So the bark that Burnhams use is not long lasting. Then it's a nursery. Apart from their specimen plants, why would you have a plant hanging around a long time when your job is to sell them? You know, you have to sort of think about, you know, when the whole purpose of the business is to sell plants, you don't expect to have them hanging around too long, do you? So what they're potted in doesn't matter as much as if it's your own. Right, most of the rest of that I'm going to get out under the tap, that wants to detach, that doesn't can stay there. And then, as I say, this is the important part of the plant. This is the bit that's got to have plenty of room to grow. If it's going to grow at this rate, you know, with bulbs that big, plus another 3, it's going to come this way in a pretty dramatic fashion. I mean, those bulbs are well over 1 inch thick, more like 1 1/4 inches, pushing 1.5 inches. And I've got another 3 to go somewhere, so it's going to have plenty of room to go that way. So I shall give that one a clean up as well. Get rid of some of these tatty old sheaths, make sure there's nothing lurking in there. That's where they lurk. Sneaky little lurkers. But yeah, it's not a bad plant. I'm quite pleased. I mean, when I got it, the bulbs that it had were quite desiccated, but it did have those 2 new growths, and those 2 new growths turned into that. So I was pleased. You know, there was enough life and energy left in there, complete with leaves, to push out 2 growths like that. I did actually get this problem on the leaves. So obviously the new growths were growing faster than they could hydrate their own leaves, because the older leaves aren't crinkled, yeah? So these crinkled ones are mine, and I'm hoping I don't get it on the next set. You know, the next 3 new growths pushing on. I hope the leaves come up nice and clean. So in the sink, get that cleaned up. Yeah, I think most of the dead ones were just in that older part of the plant, in under here. And they're not even really dead, you know. They're rock hard. You know, they're not all wishy-washy and stringy and pulling apart. But we'll have that off. Okay, I shall clean up and then we'll do the Masdevallia first. I'll be back. Okay, we'll do the Masdevallia first. I always take an opportunity when I get a plant under the tap to give the leaves a good wash at the same time, because I don't get my plants wet. But as it's going to go under the tap to wash the sort of root base off and everything, I take the opportunity to give the leaves a rinse, just get a bit of dust off and things like that. If you've got really mild rain that's not a hailstorm, you can actually put your orchids out in the rain for an hour or 2, but it must be gentle rain and warm rain. Go out in it, stick your head in it. If it don't feel nice, then it's not warm enough. But yeah, there are warm showers. There are some flipping cold ones as well. Okay, I'm going to use one of my wide, shallow pots for 2 reasons. It gives the plant a chance to expand in all directions, because I'll have a gap around the edge. It's a much smaller pot that it came out of, which I can't see at the moment. Oh, there it is. Yeah, so that's what it came out of, and that's what it's going in. So it'll have plenty of room for expansion, and I'm hoping it will. A lot of the new growths around the outside, not all of them, but some of them, and there's no dead bit in the middle like there is sometimes. You know, if they tend to grow around the outside of the plant, you can get dieback in the middle and get like a hole where there isn't any plant. But it's not doing that in this case. The new growths are coming out all over the place, including in the centre. So it can stay as it is. And what looks like a poor root system, I've seen an awful lot worse. Let's put it that way. So although it could be better, it could be worse. And what I'm going to do is get some underneath there like that. Let me get the pot out of the way this time. And then I'm going to do the same as I did with the last Masdevallias. Grab a handful and wrap it around the plant, trying not to lose that bit underneath. So I'm wrapping the whole of the outside of the plant. Yeah? And then I'm just going to plonk that in the middle of the pot. Now a lot of that fell off, but most of it is still underneath where I want it. There's another reason for using this pot. I knew once I put it in there the leaves would do that. And by planting it quite deep in the pot, the sides of the pot are going to help hold this plant up and stop it flopping too much. So that's the idea. I'm going to need more moss. I was thinking the amount of moss I used for the previous two Masdevallias and the amount I'm going to use to finish this plant off, that's about half of a bag of my moss. And I sort of think, you know, people who use moss all the time to plant all their plants in must get through it at a hell of a rate. Certainly a lot faster than I get through my bark anyway. Now all I'm going to do is push down the side so that I get some compaction, but only round the side, not in the middle, and then just top up with relatively loose. I'm going to try and keep those big chunks of sponge rock from falling into the middle of the plant. And I'm just literally going to go round like that. So I'll have to do it a bit at a time. I'm going to get through some moss here. You know, I still might not have enough. We shall see. So again, get a good bunch in there and then only push down the very edge of the pot, which strictly speaking isn't anywhere near the roots, and bypassing the roots altogether. And then gradually build up as I go round. And there might have to be a break while I get some more moss into soak, because I don't think I'm going to have enough. As I said, I don't want this compacted right down. That's not how they would grow. If you have a look at pictures of where these grow, you know, pictures in situ, in the steamy jungle, except for it's not, but the equivalent, the montane forest, which is the cold steamy jungle. Effectively, that's what you really get. You get, yeah, I'll just put some moss into soak while I'm gassing. You get the moist air coming in off the ocean, basically. And most of the places where these come from, the ocean's not too far away. And the prevailing winds bring that warm, moist air in off the sea. And as they come inland, they reach the base of the mountains. And the wind keeps blowing, the airflow keeps going, and the only way is up. So that produces an airflow through the jungly bits. Yeah, but there is an inherent problem, which is how montane forests actually occur. You've got moisture-laden, warm air climbing up the mountains. And what happens as you climb a mountain? It gets colder. Try going up a mountain in your t-shirt. And when you get to the top, you want your ski jacket on. Yeah, so that's what's going on. And as it gets cooler, the air can't hold the moisture anymore. So it basically forms condensation in the air, which is endearingly known as mist and fog. And that's how you get your montane forests. And that's why they are misty and foggy, but they're not warm. The warmth was left behind a long time ago as the air climbs the mountain. So it's more of a gentle airflow, you know, not force 8 gales. And then right in amongst all that undergrowth and stuff are your Masdevallias. They tend to grow low down, so the airflow is not dynamic, you know. if you were walking through those areas, you'd hardly feel a breeze. The air would seem quite still, but nonetheless it's gently flowing. And they tend to grow on branches with moss on, sometimes in amongst other plants. But the moss is often quite short, you know, not big lush stuff. And I think that that's why they don't seem to have long, extensive, clingy roots, because the air's not moving that much. They don't need to hang on for dear life. Yes, they need to hang on, but not to the extent that some in, say, deciduous forests might have to do. And that's why I think they make do with what to us looks like quite poor root systems, because they don't have to hang on, they just have to be there. And their roots can just sink down in gently into whatever's there. Not much in a lot of cases. Quite shallow moss, quite short, tufty sort of moss on the branches. And they live quite happily like that. Do some more in there. That's a lot of moss. So there's a slight hollow in the plant where obviously at some point in the past I presume a little bit died back, so there's like a little recess in the side, and I don't want a gaping hole. You know, if it does push out roots into that area, they need to get into something. So this is quite loosely packed near the top of the plant, but more compact as you go down into the pot, which is what I'm hoping the roots are now going to do. But if you compact the moss now, at the start of your repotting process, it's only going to get worse as you water and the moss gets older. It will become more and more compacted to the point where you're suffocating your roots because you've excluded all the air. So that's it. I'm happy with that. Yeah, doesn't wobble. Put me tag in, not that I'd ever forget that one. I certainly haven't got any other Masdevallias that look like that. Probably never will have too. And do you know what? This also, it's not only a good grower, and it keeps its leaves nice and green. I very, very rarely get a leaf fall off of this. It just seems to hang on to them. It doesn't shed its leaves. They don't turn yellow and fall off like some do. So most of these leaves have been there a long time. And apart from, as I said, a little bit of fertiliser burn on the odd leaf, they're in good nick. And the other thing this one puts up with, this is actually in quite bright light. And it seems to love it. There is no sign anywhere of any light damage. And this is actually quite close to the glass. It's in quite a cool place as well, but this is quite close to the glass on the lowest shelf. It seems to love it. Now it is going to come away from the glass for a while now, just to let it get established in the new media and some of those new root tips to get going a bit. So I'll give it a bit less light for a while, still keep it cool, and we'll see how it comes on. But as Masdevallias go, that really is not a bad plant. I can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's 8 new growths coming on that at the moment. That's 8 new leaves effectively, because none of them are spikes. Plus the ones that are pushing up anyway. You know, that's a new leaf, that's still growing. You can tell the new leaves, different colour, yeah? Older leaves, darker, newer leaves, bright green. Nice plant, like that one. Right, I'll have a bit of a tidy up and sort out some media for the other one. I've decided what I'm going to do. Okay, before I start, I'll just explain the logic. I've either got a pot that's too small, the plant will outgrow that probably in one season, so it would defeat the object of putting it in the Orchiata butt. I have to move it again. Or I've got one that's far too big. There are ways of dealing with pots that are too big. What I'm after is that, the room for expansion, not the depth. Yeah? So the first thing I'm going to do is put a rock in the bottom. These have got, you see the holes are in a ring, so there is no ventilation in the centre of that pot. Yeah? So I'm not wasting any of the ventilation, but what I am going to do is get myself a pretty stable pot for a very tall plant. And then it's going to get a shed load of large bark. How deep's my pot now? I've just used a third of the pot with chunky bark. Now if roots get down in that, that's not a problem. I bet next time I come to repot it, half the roots have attached to that rock. That'd be just my luck. Okay, so that's the basics. Now I'll go and get my media sorted out to actually plant the plant in. Okay, what I'm going to plant it in is based on what it came out of, because the roots were doing very well. There was nothing wrong with the root system, so the way it was being grown before, it was happy with. There was nothing wrong with it, so there's no real reason to change. But the one thing I did notice, that the grade of bark that it came out of was, I'd suggest it was the medium grade, but a lot of the pieces were smaller than my medium grade. I mean, this medium grade has got some smaller bits in it. It's never exact, it can't be. It's got some flaky bits in. So I'm going to mix in some small bark. Yeah? Given that that had slightly hairy roots, you know, it's not necessarily terrestrial, but bordering on it. You know, looking at the roots on this, it looks like it's a low grower. You know, and parts of the plant may well be in sort of leaf litter down the base of trees and things like that. So by mixing small and my medium, bearing in mind my medium has some smaller pieces in it, I've got somewhere near what it was in before. So it's not such a dramatic change. And so I always sort through this, because every now and again there's like a piece of wood that is not bark. So just like a piece of timber, but this little pile doesn't look too bad. Now this is a big pot, and I suspect I haven't got enough, but we'll start off by putting some of this stuff that I want the roots in, and we'll go from there. So I don't want everything out of camera shot. Now when I cut that back bulb off, yeah, unfortunately the plant fell in two. The single back bulb had split, and when I took it off I was left with two pieces of rhizome. So I've actually got two plants. Yeah? I've got this one with two new growths and two leaved back bulbs. That's a good plant. And then I've got this one, which unfortunately is one of those at a bit of an angle. Yeah? It's growing at a slope. Now this has a single new growth but a bigger previous growth, and it's still got two back bulbs and they're both leaved. So that's what I've got to plant. Two back bulbs, great big fat new growth that's matured, and two new growths on one new growth on the other, and a good root system on both. And the objective is to get the older bits of the plant right up the back against the pot, which will leave the growth that I did in the middle of the pot, and the whole of the rest of the pot for the new growths to expand into. So that's where we're going with this. Now I normally start with my media around the back, but this time I'm starting around the front because I need to get some sort of stability with what I'm doing before I start squashing the plant backwards. And then I've also got to tip the plant slightly forward. That's the bit I was after, because of the true back bulbs, the oldest bulbs, were deeper in the pot. And by sloping the plant slightly forward, I'm raising those back bulbs up slightly. But if you get a situation like that, just don't put so much media around the back of the pot, and then they don't get buried. You can always have a slope. Your media doesn't have to be dead flat in the pot. It's not a competition, you know, somebody's not going to come round with a level and make sure it's absolutely spot on. It's a plant. So by not putting so much media around the back, I've automatically not sunken the back bulbs into the media. And then I can pile it up round the front, because that's where the new growths and their associated new roots are going to be. So now we can start piling it in, and I don't think I'm going to have enough. I'll have enough to get the plant stable, But to top it up and get it right, I shall have to go and get a bit more. I've got a hole there, that's between the two plants. So while I can see it, I'll fill it up. Because in a minute I won't be able to see it. And then it'll be an air hole. I did say air hole, you did hear me right. There's quite a deep little hole in there. Oh, I'm glad I spotted that and filled it now, because once I'd got a handful of, you know, a bit more, that would have been lost to my sight. Okay, well the plant's where I want it, it's already stable, but I need more media around here. And because that's where the newer growth is going to be, I'll be a bit heavier on the small bark. So it starts off small bark with not too much air and gradually opens up as it moves down the pot. And there's a bit of logic to that. The bit of the pot that's going to stay wettest, especially in one this big, is the bottom. Well, if that's where the biggest bits of bark are, it doesn't matter as much, and they won't stay wet because they've got lots more air around them, so that it'll get out. Anyway, I'll just come back when I've got a bit more media. Okay, a bit more media. Basically, I've just separated the plant slightly because that hole in the middle was actually quite useful, because that's where that's going to go. If you think how big that bulb is, when this new growth is that big, it's going to be touching that one. And who knows, when this one pushes out its next new growth, it might go that way instead of this way. They have a habit of just going where they please instead of where it makes sense, as I would say. So I pushed a gap between the two plants, and that will give that new growth somewhere to be when it swells up, which it will do in the not too distant future. It's strange, I was just thinking back, you know, memories, flashbacks. When I first got this plant, obviously Burnham's had recently potted it. And I looked at it and I thought, my God, that's over potted. That pot's huge. And yet in no time at all, it had pushed on new growths and filled up all the space that I thought was wasted. So Sarah did know what she was doing. But it didn't look right when I got it. It just looked as though the pot was far too big, and I was sort of thinking, yeah, is that the only pot you had? And that's what I've just done. You know, this was the only suitable pot I had. But in this particular case, it's a little bit wobbly, but I think that's going to stabilise itself because it's got a load of roots in there once they take off. And I don't want any more. I'll show you if you can see it. Round the back of the pot, there's not much media. Yeah? It's like much lower down the pot. And that's so as these back bulbs are not sunken in the media. Because if they get sunken in the media, they're prone to rotting. So I've just literally left the back of the pot shallow. And where the new growths are, that's where it's up to its level that I want it to be. And yes, it looks a bit over potted, but this would have been in my before video. Now, okay, it would have been in its original pot, but you know, I've got a clip of this ready for the end of the season showing, I'm not even sure all of these new growths were even showing at the time, but these two bulbs were virtually mature as they are now in its original pot. So when we get to the end of the season, we can see how much of the front of that pot these growths have used up. And then we can make a judgment call on how many seasons worth of growth we're going to get out of this pot. I would hope at least 2. You know, I mean, this season's growth are these 3. If next season's growth start in the spring and there's only one season's growth in effect, there'll be enough for it to stay in there all of next year as well as all of this year. And because it's in the orchiata bark, if it fills its pot up, God knows what I'm going to do. I'll need a bucket, won't I? If it fills the pot up at the end of the following season, in other words the end of next year, I know, because I potted it, it's actually 2 plants and it'll split. It'll stay as 2 plants, they're not going to join back together. So that's that one done. Shall I keep my Burnham's tag? No, it's a flippy floppy tag. Trouble is, and I've got a lot of writing, it's got Coleogyne Moriana, and then in quotes Magnifica, And then FCRHS, that's its award, Brockhurst in brackets. That's an awful lot for me to write, isn't it? I'll leave Sarah's tag in there. I mean, it's printed nicely, I can read it. It's just I know what her flippy floppy tags are like. Once you take them out of the pot, they're a pain to get back in because they're so bendy. But the writing doesn't come off, you know, they're perfectly good tags. And we'll put the tag around the back of the plant. There we go. So that's that one done. Big Masdevallia and big Coleogene. And while you're on film, I'm telling you now, I want some blooms out of you. I was expecting these two massive bulbs to bloom and they haven't. Now, other people that have got this told me that you tend to get the flower spikes when the bulbs are sort of semi-mature. So in theory, any one of these three new growths could produce a spike. I say could, because it hasn't bloomed yet. Time will tell. Okay, see you next time. Thanks for dropping by.